Hey guys, Mr. Tweet here. So in this video, I'm going to go over shifts on the supply and demand graph. So what happens when we put supply and demand together on the same axes, and then we have some sort of change that leads to a shift? How does that work? So um, we're going to start by drawing our axes, right? So we draw our axes, and then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make a big X. That's supply and demand. They can be slightly curved if you want. They can be straight lines. That's a matter of personal taste and preference, right? So we have our axes and we have a big X. And then we're going to label them. And out here on this edge out here, we're going to label the one that's up in the sky. That's going to be supply. We label with an S. The one that's down in the dirt, we label with a D for demand. So we draw our axes, we make our big X, and then we put supply in the sky and demand in the dirt, right? Don't mix those up because then, everything you do is going to be wrong after that. So you got to have supply in the sky, demand in the dirt. Demand is downward sloping, supply is upward sloping. Demand has that indirect relationship, supply has a direct. Sorry, demand has an inverse relationship, supply has a direct relationship. Label our axes, price, and quantity, Q. Now, if you remember from previous units, on demand, we have quantity demanded. On supply, we have quantity supplied. Quantity just is that it's the same for either. So for instance, if I had a price that was like right here, whatever that price is, right? If I have a price right there, well, then I'm just going to, if I go across at that price, what curve am I hitting right there? I'm on my supply curve. So I go down, that's my quantity supplied. I keep going across at that price. I hit my demand curve right there, I go down, that would be my quantity demanded. So my quantity supplied, my quantity demanded, it's based on price, right? And we can show both of them on one graph. So down here, I could label this, right? I could label that with my QS for quantity supplied, and I could label this other one QD for quantity demanded. All right, so we got them on the same graph. What happens when there's a shift? Well, first thing you need to know is that for every scenario, there's only one shift. Next week, we're going to get into double shifts where we're going to have two scenarios that are going to be causing two things to happen at the same time. But for each one thing that happens, you can only have one shift. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to start going like, okay, if the Captain Crunch becomes more popular, tastes and preferences, then demand is going to increase. And when demand increases, then the price is going to go up, and then that's going to make supply go up. And so supply increase, now you're down the wrong track. There's only one shift for every event that happens, every change that happens, right? So it's going to be supply or demand that's going to shift. It's not going to be both, at least today. It could be both if we had two things that were happening at the same time, but I'm only going to give you one thing for now. So we have something that happens, it's going to cause supply or demand to shift, right? So here we've got our graph. Let's make this the graph for my favorite thing in the world, burritos. So I've got my graph for burritos here, right? Now let's say that, let's demonstrate something that happened in the real world, a couple months back. So back in June, you might remember, as one of the effects of global pandemic was that a lot of meat packing plants in the Midwest had to shut down because they had COVID outbreaks at those meat packing plants. So that meant beef wasn't being processed. That meant that it was harder for stores and restaurants to get beef. So what happened was beef packing plants closed down. It made beef harder to get and more expensive, right? Well, what's the relationship between beef and burritos, right? If you're like me, you get carne asada burritos. Beef is a key ingredient, or in other words, it's a resource, right? So if a resource becomes more expensive and or harder to get, then the supply of things made out of those resources is going to decrease. So what I'm going to do here on my graph is I'm going to start by, right, we got to remember, increase to the right, decrease to the left, right? Whenever we're shifting in economics, it's almost always going to be shifting on the x-axis, our dependent axis. So increase to the right, decrease to the left. So if the price of beef goes up and the availability of beef goes down, then supply is going to decrease. So I draw an arrow to the left, we decrease to the left, right? And then once I put my arrow in there showing me what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to draw a parallel line. So I'm going to draw a line that's parallel to my supply curve. See that here? We want to label it. I'm going to label it S1. So I have mine, I usually do like S and then S sub 1. Some people start with S1 and then their new one is S2. Some people do S naught or S sub 0 and then they shift to S1. It doesn't really matter as long as somebody else can read your graph. So as long as, it wouldn't make sense if this was like, if you labeled this thing right here like SA and then this one was S1, I wouldn't know what comes first, A or 1, right? Or if you labeled this one S2 and then the new one S1, that would be totally backwards and it wouldn't make sense. So as long as it's logical and somebody else can read it, doesn't really matter what your little notation is on there. On the AP test, sometimes they'll even tell you what to do. So there you go. All right, so supply shifting to the left. Now, I want to label my original equilibrium and my new equilibrium. So I'm going to label my original equilibrium, the intersection between my original supply and demand. I'm going to label that P sub E for equilibrium and Q sub E for equilibrium. So that was my original equilibrium that I have labeled there, right? Remember, equilibrium is our market clearing price and quantity. That at that price and quantity, everybody who wants to buy can buy, everybody who wants to sell can sell. There's nobody stuck looking for, there's no businesses that can't sell their product because it's priced too high. There's no consumers that can't find that product because it's priced too low. That at equilibrium, right, we got the quantity supplied matches the quantity demanded, right? But now we've had a change. And what happens when there's a change is we get a new equilibrium. Now, in the real world, what happens when there's a shortage of beef is that restaurants start realizing that they're running low on their supply of carne asada and they're having a hard time getting more. And so in order to allocate that scarce resource, what they do is they start raising the price of their carne asada burritos until they get to the point where customers coming in and buying burritos is at a sustainable level. When they go like, okay, well, we raised the price of our carne asada burrito by $3. So now people aren't buying carne asada burritos as much. They're switching to other things like pollo asada or something else, or bean and cheese. And so now we're not selling as many carne asada burritos, and now our supply of carne asada is being refreshed at the rate at which it's selling. So they have to just kind of keep raising their price till they get there. But on our model, it's going to happen just instantly. We're going to know what the new equilibrium price needs to be because we can see it. Whereas in the real world, they kind of got to work their way there. It might take a week or so for us to get a new equilibrium, right? With some things, the new equilibrium is found like instantly. Like when there's new information that comes out about a stock, the stock market trades like so frequently, and the information is usually made public in such a fast way that when new information comes out about a stock, usually within minutes or it's the stock is now priced that new information in. So the stock market adjusts. Its supply and demand for a stock is just like supply and demand for anything else. It's just they adjust within minutes, seconds sometimes. But for like carne asada burritos, it takes them a week for them to adjust their prices and get to the point where they're like, okay, now people are switching to other things instead of carne asada burritos or California burritos. They're switching to pollo asada or bean and cheese or fish burritos or whatever, something else that they can, that they don't have a shortage of. And so it allows that, it takes them a little while to figure that out. But we're going to label our new equilibrium and I'm going with P1 and Q1. So that's our new price and our new quantity, right? So we find our new price and our new quantity. And then what I like to do is I like to put arrows on the over here and down here, showing the direction of the change, right? And in fact, you might even, a lot of times if it's like an AP test question, they might ask you specifically to say what happens to price or quantity. So off here on the side, we're going to say that price is going up, quantity is going down. All right? And that's how you show a shift. Supply and demand model. Now, bonus time. Well, I started this by saying like there's only one for every event that happens, there's only one shift, and not to take it too far and don't be like, oh, Captain Crunch is not cool anymore, so demand goes down, and when demand goes down, the price goes down. So now when the price goes down, the supply is going to go down, blah, 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 right? It leads you, you don't want to start shifting anything else, right? Well, in fact, when there is a shift to supply or demand, the other one is affected, but this already shows it. That's why we don't need to do another shift, is because you could already see the effect, right? So what happened here, right? Chain of events, right? We were at our original equilibrium. This is my original quantity. This right here is my original quantity supplied and quantity demanded. Something happened, right? Outbreak of coronavirus leads to a global pandemic, leads to an outbreak at meat packing plants, causes the availability of beef to decrease, the price to go up. That's a resource. So what we see here is a shift to supply, right? So we had a shift to supply. What happened to demand? Demand did not move. My demand curve is still in the same place, right? For me, the desire to eat a carne asada burrito or a California burrito is unchanged because there's a virus outbreak, right? That is, it's what I feel about carne asada burritos, the utility that I get is still the same, right? I don't care that the taco shop is having a hard time getting carne asada. That doesn't matter to me, right? What matters to me is the flavor and the taste and the satisfaction that I get, and that's unchanged. So my demand hasn't changed at all. But what does happen when supply shifts, we get a new equilibrium, price went up. And the law of demand says that when price goes up, quantity demanded must go down. Now, how do I show that? I already did. I've already showed it. Because remember, a change in price does not shift your curve. A change in price is going to lead to a change in quantity demanded or quantity supplied. So what we get is a shift of the supply curve leads to a change in price, and the change in price is going to get us to move from this spot on our demand curve to this spot on our demand curve. We're now at a new spot on the demand curve, which means my quantity demanded has moved. And you see that down here. Quantity equilibrium has moved, has decreased to the left, and our new quantity demanded is right here where Q1 is. Quantity supplied also changed, but that changed because of the shift of the curve. But the new equilibrium caused us to get a move on demand. So what we see now is that when we have a shift of supply, we get a move on demand. And when we have a shift of demand, it causes a move on supply. So originally in section, like, I don't remember what it was, whenever, section 1, 2 or something, like when we first drew the demand curve, it was like, well, what happens if price changes? Well, if price changes, quantity demanded changes, right? But now you see that price doesn't just change. Price responds to a shift of supply or demand. So what happens in the real world is supply or demand shifts for some reason. This causes a new equilibrium with a new price, and that new price leads to a new quantity demanded or quantity supplied, whichever curve didn't shift. And it's all contained in this one model, this one graph right here. So what this graph does a phenomenal job of showing us is how when we have an event, how it affects both consumers and producers, right? Global pandemic happens, right? I'm a dude in San Diego, literally in June, on the last day when we did the drive-through graduation. After the drive-through graduation, Millsap and I were going to go golfing that afternoon. And when we went to go golfing, we stopped at a taco shop, and Millsap was like, dude, Tweet, I'm going to get your burrito for you. And I was like, sweet. He's like, what do you want? And I was like, carne asada, right? And so he walked in and he ordered a carne asada burrito for me, and he ordered 2 fish tacos for himself. And the person was like, all right, that's going to be like $22. And Millsap was like, what? That seems like a lot of money. And then they pointed to some sign that was like, because of the shortage of beef, we've temporarily raised the prices on our carne asada. And I was like, dude, I didn't even know that. I'm sorry, because I ended up ordering a $13 burrito, right? You heard that right. $13 for a taco shop carne asada burrito. Should have been $7.50 like it is everywhere else. But because of the shortage of beef, they raised their price, right? What happened was global-wide pandemic caused supply of a key ingredient to go down, which caused the price of those things to go up. So they raised their price. And then what happened was, you better believe, right, a few days later, when I went to go to the taco shop by myself, I didn't order a carne asada burrito because the price had gone up. Quantity demanded went down. I was like, you know what? I like pollo asada almost as much. I'm just going to get a pollo asada burrito for what is now almost half the price. That's economics. This shows us, right, the real things that we experience when there's a change to supply or demand for whatever reason. So I've got a bunch of practice problems for you. And then we'll be talking about this in Zooms next week. We'll be going over shifting supply and demand, probably Tuesday, Wednesday. All right. See you guys.